Hi, this is Ed Jaffe, and welcome back to JaffeWoodwinds.com. Today we're going to have as our guest one of the most influential clarinetists in the 20th and now 21st century, and also a person who has established himself as a virtuoso player, not only on clarinet, but on saxophone and flute as well. This is someone who I've wanted to have in this series for many years, and he's finally in New York and was nice enough to give us this afternoon so we could do this video interview. And I'm talking about none other than perhaps the greatest jazz clarinet player in the world today, Eddie Daniels. Eddie,
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks for doing this so much. And
I'll try to believe that.
You won't have a hard time. Well, I also want, before we begin the interview, I want to thank Ronnie and Joanna Odrich for allowing us to come to their home today to do this video. And we have a number of guests in the audience, friends of ours, and so you'll hear a little bit of audience reaction, hopefully, during the course of the interview. Eddie, I wanted to start off our interview today with a little reminiscence of something that I don't know if you might remember, but in the mid-1980s, when you were living on the Upper West Side and I was also on the Upper West Side, we were coming home from a recording day at RCA in a cab, sharing a cab home, and you had just released Solfeggiato, the Breakthrough album. Which was, really the first album as a leader for you that really took off on a large scale and really set your solo career, in motion. And I asked you in the car after we had talked a little bit, I said, well, what are you hoping to do, because you were still doing work as a sideman, as a studio commercial player, in addition to doing jazz gigs around New York. But this album seemed to have another direction, and you said to me at the time, I'm looking to be the James Galway of clarinet. And now, many years later here, I would say that you've accomplished that. You're known worldwide, certainly as a clarinet soloist, both in jazz and classical realms. Do you feel like you've achieved that initial goal that you had set forth that so many years ago?
I think it was a good general pattern for me of showing all the studying with Bonad, with Jimmy Abato, with Bernie Portnoy, with Joe Allard, who was my favorite of all of them. It was a nice prototype, but I'm not sure, to be a Jimmy Galway is a whole other thing. Aside from the fact that the flute's a lot easier than the clarinet.
Well,
I'm for Jimmy, who has called me on the phone and said, "Would you give me jazz lessons? I want to be able to do what you do." And I said, "Sure, 5 minutes, I'll give it all to you." Right? But he was kind of curious. He just thought, like a lot of classical players, I'd really like to be able to do that, and they don't realize that to do that would be like me being the James Galway of the clarinet and being able to play jazz. I think I've kind of put together a certain amount of classical chops, and I have my own sound on the clarinet, and I have my own thing in classical music. But I'd say, as a general prototype, I'd say maybe I have a percentage of a James Galway on the clarinet, which is not an easy thing to do.
But that was a lofty goal that you had set for yourself, especially because you had already established yourself as a formidable multiple woodwind player in the studio's original charter member of the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. Yeah. You had already released a number of albums, jazz albums, that those in the know really respected. You now have over 30 albums as a leader, both here in the United States and, of course, overseas.
Well, I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. There's no... every day I pick up the clarinet. As soon as I start noodling, I find things I don't like. I start working on them. There's no achieving anything, other than other people saying to you, "Wow, you sound great. I love what you do." But then you have to pick this up and do it again, and to do it again is not easy. It's a very, very hard instrument, which is what keeps me alive. I love a challenge. To be the Galway of the clarinet, or to be even the Galway of the flute, is immense. He's a I have to bring his name back. Ridiculous, phenomenal player, just phenomenal player. And there are clarinet players now in the classical realm who are kind of like that. Ricardo Morales, And this Czechoslovakian guy named Rajka, who I met at the clarinet thing, who can
and Julian Bliss.
And Julian Bliss, they can play anything.
Yeah.
So I guess what I found, back then there weren't clarinet players who could play anything. There were a lot of good classical clarinet players, and Barbara Marsalis was definitely one of the most beautiful, and Stanley Drucker, and a number of them. But there was, now we're in this new age where clarinetists are double tonguing. They're playing so fast. I mean, I can move my fingers as fast. I can't double tongue. I'm starting to practice that because I want a little of that.
Right.
But I think I've lost the desire to be the James Galway of the clarinet. I think I'm just going to try to. I think the combination that I add is my own thing, so I don't have to try to be him of this or him of this. To do gums like I want to be the Ron Odrich of the gums.
You would find it.
So my goals have changed, and I'm kind of satisfied to just like melt when I play, be able to make some of the passages that are really hard, and maybe get out there in front of an audience, like when I played the Calandrelli, and go for it, and be on the stick.
Right.
So I've changed a little bit in that.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I ever achieved being the James Galway. And maybe there are moments where somebody would hear the solfeggetto back then and say, wow, he's the James Galway of the clarinet. I can do that in 5 minutes. But then to have a career of that is quite a different thing.
It's a different ballgame. But the enormity of what you've achieved on all of the instruments. Now, a lot of our viewers, especially the younger viewers, might not realize how formidable a saxophonist and flutist Eddie was. And still can be, and at times when we get him to play tenor, it's unbelievable. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about in detail was something that Jerry Dodgen told me a number of years ago when we were talking about you. And Jerry said, Eddie really knows how to practice. It's not just he practices, he knows how to practice. Now that sounds simplistic, but it really is not, because you can give a lot of time to practicing any discipline, whether it be music or tennis or golf or whatever. But if you don't do it right, it's not fruitful. And you obviously have done that on all your instruments. So can you talk a little bit about how you go about your practice sessions, and we'll go even back to when you were playing flute and tenor, in a very hard way, because I was studying with you during that period, and I remember how intense a practicer you were. I always thought you were the person who was the hardest practicer I ever met in the industry. No, I'm not saying that because we're doing the interview, but it rubbed off on me a little bit, and I think everyone who studied with you felt that way. So how do you go about practicing your instrument? Is there a formula that you use? Is there a steady routine? Or do you sort of improvise from day to day?
Tequila with a shot of lime, with a little bit of lime and some Cointreau. It really works. No, it's a great question, and the more I think about it, it's all about focus. If you're not focused on what you're doing, then you could be practicing a page of music, and the notes are going by, and you're moving your fingers, and it sounds like practicing.
Right.
And then you get, and I've kind of wondered, I ask myself, what am I? Am I good? Can I really do what you're saying? And, I'll pick up the clarinet and a few notes go by and I say, oh, I didn't like the way that A or the B to A sounded, and I will slow it down. Immediately I pick it up and I'm playing fast. Then I say, ooh, why are you doing that? So I would slow it down. And it doesn't matter what you do. If you're a tennis player, you watch Federer play tennis, you watch Nadal. These are guys who have put in so many hours. So you need a lot of hours, right? But you can't just put in hours. It's got to be focused milliseconds. So within those hours are milli smaller than a millisecond of the focus of being so in tune with the way the racket is hitting the ball, or the way the lip is feeling the reed, or the way you're hearing the note. And Joe Allard used to say, what you're hearing when you're hearing, your hearing will guide you to where you want to be sound-wise. So that was Joe Allard's way of saying, not all analytics are work. With someone with an ear and someone who hears in their head at least where they want to go. So that's a focus, where in your head you're hearing the sound that you want. And that's kind of a Tibetan monk would focus on a sound. I was reading a book the other day, just stay focused on the sound or anything in life, the leaf on the tree, and just stare at it and say it and watch it be. And so as you're listening to a sound in your head that you would like, that will guide you to where you want to go. And Joe Allard, I know you're going to bring up some questions about him, but his way was, well, put your lip here, do this, don't squeeze the reed, all these mechanical things that were great for all of us at one time. But the ultimate is
forgetting about that.
Or not just being so focused in the moment, in the sound, in whatever it is. It could be anything in the world. And I got on my own case the other day. I'm driving a new car and I'm driving down and I'm looking at the dashboard. It has all these fancy things in it. It's a new Audi S4. And it's like it's a complicated device. And I find myself looking down for a second while I'm driving. And the guy in front of me stops. So I go, I'm fast enough in my reacting to a tennis ball coming to me or changes coming to me that I pulled out of the way. But I was really, and I'm still upset at myself for not staying on the road with the eyes and being so enamored of this dashboard that has all these fancy things that it can do. It can make your chair vibrate. So how do I do that? And I was sitting there, I don't like the way the chair feels. So I looked down and there's somebody, and that could have been my life. So that's focus right there. And so now I'm going to say my thing is never take your eyes off the road. And Denise McLuggage, who is a very famous racing car lady who won races as a woman, which she was. In the early days, she was one of the first women. One of her rules of driving is you're not looking anywhere but where the car is going, And so that was a lesson to me, and I should have heard it. And now having a new car that I'm enamored with, I'm going to say your focus on that will be later looking at the manual and focusing on that. But that's what you got to focus on. So we choose our focuses, and how passionate and how much you want what it is you're focusing on will determine how well you do it. Right. And it's not just repetition. You can repeat. I have a lot of friends, trumpet players. Louis Soloff used to say he'd practice while watching TV. And Alan Rubin used to watch the TV while they're practicing. And these are guys who can really play. They're great players.
Top of the game.
Yeah, they're the top of the game. But yet, when you're watching TV and you're practicing, that's like me looking down at the computer in the car while there are things going by. So he's looking at the TV and he's practicing, but how present, that means he's divided in two parts. He's divided in looking what's going on TV, and then he's divided here. So he's not the problem is he's so good that he thinks he can get away with that. And then it becomes this mechanical practicing instead of within those milliseconds of playing one note to the other, there's a sensitivity that I believe, for me, is lost. They were saying, and Lou and Alan Rubin were saying at the time, it's more like a physical exercise. We're just doing this, we're moving our fingers, we're practicing.
Right, but maybe the difference here is sustenance practicing
That's
as
true.
opposed to elevating your level.
Right. Yeah, but a sustenance practice, you're not focusing on what you're doing. So what good is that? So you're building your air, but that means all those notes are going by, and you're not caring that much about the rhythm.
Eddie, they're trumpet players.
You're right. Okay, but I mean, focus. It's it's something we all have to do every minute. You walk down the street in New York. If you lose your presence, somebody could be around you and put their hand in your pocket, or you might get hit by a car. A lot of things. It doesn't have to do with somebody taking your wallet, but it could be, I've had moments where I'm walking and I didn't see the pole and I walk into a pole. We've all done that because we're not paying attention to what we're doing.
Right.
So I think it's good for all of us to have focusing practices during the day that are not with our instrument and that are then with our instrument. Right. There's Jimmy Abato, and I see Jimmy Abato on the wall.
That's the Wall of Fame.
Yeah, the Wall of Fame.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I remember at the period of time I was studying with you, you were very much into the flute at the time, and you were putting in a good 6 hours a day on flute. Now, for the doublers who are tuning in, the multi-instrumentalists, I think, if I remember correctly, you said that for a period of years you have to focus on one instrument and keep the others going, but that there's an intense period for a few years on every instrument where that receives priority and all. Do you still feel
Well, it's
that
the same
way?
thing that I'm saying about focusing on the moment. You get good with that moment, but if you want, you can't play 3 or 4 instruments on the level, at least that I want to play them. I mean, we each have our individual desires of what we want. We may all play the same instrument, but when I pick it up, there's a motor in me that wants to go towards something. And it may not be the same motor that you have, Ron, or that you do, Ed, but it's just like, okay, we all have the same mouthpiece, clarinet, same make, same brand, same reed, and we each pick it up and we say, okay, we're all 3 of us are playing the clarinet. And yet my inner motor of what I want to hear and what I want to do has to be different from each one of us and every other clarinet player in the world. So, we're all products of our upbringing, our desires, having parents that were difficult in the house made me go in a practice room and practice. It got me away from some of the stress of being in the Michigas in the house.
Yeah.
And so that was a great reason to focus. God, you get in, I'm in another world. We are, as musicians, so lucky because we get into another world when we play. We get into the creative, the right brain, if that's the side. I always mix up which side it is. But is it the right brain? That's the creative side? Yeah. Okay. So we get into that right away because we're not being verbal. We're suddenly playing something that it's not a think thing unless you think, oh, I don't like this, I better try this. Or how do I fix this? But most of the time when you're playing, you're not thinking, you're guiding. You're driving your instrument like driving a car, and you're paying attention and you're watching the notes go by and you're taking it in. So to be a multi-instrumentalist is you have to be able to be great on one. Right. If you can't be great on one, you're never going to be great on 3.
Right.
So then how could you be, so at least that was my idea. I played the clarinet. I studied with Bonad and Jimmy Abato and all great teachers. And then I thought, the flute. Yeah, the flute. I heard Julie Baker, and I realized I'd have to play the flute to become a Broadway show musician.
A studio
guy. But then it was back then you started by getting a Broadway show.
Right.
And you just honed your craft by playing all of this stuff, picking that up and then picking this up and putting it back down. But then you start studying and you realize, well, I want to play the first flute chair in this show in MAME, which was the show at the time.
Was Jimmy on that with you?
At one point, Cal Arperman was the clarinet player one time, Jimmy Abato. Joe Soldo got me the gig because he left.
Right.
And he gave me 1 flute lesson, and I was good enough to maybe play parts, but I thought, I want more on this instrument. I want what this instrument can do. I want the best. So I went to Harold Bennett, who at the time was the kind of guy that would give you the regimen where you knew if you did these exercises, you're going to be great. But he didn't tell you that you have to focus on those exercises. Of course, a lot of those students went in there, they can play them all great, but there were parts where what happened to the brain on that note, but a lot of, it was a very good discipline to be, his mirror was in front of you and you're sitting here and he's sitting there and I'm playing an etude and he's playing it, or we're playing a duet and I'm seeing both of us in the mirror. All of us who have been in that room know what that felt like.
Late at night.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's like, how important is this to you? I didn't want to play the flute as a doubler. I wanted to play the flute as good as anybody could play that. I wanted to be the James Galway of the flute at that time.
Right. Just to interject, for those who may not know, Harold Bennett was the esteemed principal flute of the Metropolitan Opera for many years and had a huge clientele of students in addition to his work as principal flute, and was a former Kincaid student and really a beautiful sounding flute player.
Yeah, very different from anything today and anything very different from Galway, but closer to Galway than to Julie Baker. Yes. Julie Baker had this round, beautiful, lush sound, and Harold had more of a focused sound, and Galway's got like a bigger panorama, but Harold's sound was just very, very special and different. It was a joy to hear that kind of purity in the sound of his flute, and so that when I hear a sound, I get I'm like obsessed. I hear the sound and I love it, and I want to go towards that sound.
Right.
You know,
so that's what would drive you on the flute, and certainly did on the clarinet, and saxophone. So, and you mentioned, the home scene and focusing on that, but many people may not realize that your first instrument was not actually clarinet; it was saxophone.
Alto saxophone. Yeah, yeah. I never had the discipline on saxophone that I had on the clarinet or the flute. The saxophone was something you learn to play it. You kind of bop around on it. Not that you can't be great as a classical saxophone player, but there was no routine. I wouldn't say that the saxophone was ever something I really studied from a teacher, other than Joe would show me, oh, do this. The first time I went up to his studio, he said, take your teeth off the top of the mouthpiece and play, and so, he gave me certain things to think of, but not technically or not that kind of
regiment.
The tenor kind of found its own way without me over practicing it. While I was then studying the clarinet, so my fingers were getting more focused on the clarinet, and then the tenor got better.
Would you say for doublers who are looking in that if one were to design an ideal approach to becoming a multiple woodwind player, that the clarinet would be the first instrument to study?
No, because most of the clarinet players that I know who study classical clarinet will never go to jazz, because the clarinet has a way of like tightening you and if you get serious about studying the clarinet and going to a classical teacher, I think it will hamper your desire to be loose, unless you have a loose teacher or a loose tooth, Ron. I'm sorry. If you have a very relaxed teacher who's very good at classical music and can get you to play it a little looser, because most of the students that come from some of the best teachers that there were at the time, Marcellus and Bonad, they couldn't make a different sound on the clarinet other than the beautiful sound they were studying. Right. So I wouldn't say that. For me, it was better to play the saxophone because it was freer. I wasn't playing Creston Sonata, although I started to play some of the Marcel Mule repertoire, right, and I loved it. But I didn't overly practice the saxophone. Somehow it didn't demand that of me. It didn't scare me. The saxophone didn't scare me. The clarinet scared me, because it's so overwhelming to play this instrument. And the flute, minor scare. But it's so singing that you're going to have fun playing the flute. It's beautiful. It's got such a nice open thing to it. So the clarinet is the one that got me disciplined, but I already had this loose feeling of the saxophone where you just play with your shoulder and you're moving it, right, and you're playing it and you say, wow, this is fun. It's fun. Saxophone is fun. Right. Like guitar is fun for a lot of people who haven't played instruments. They pick up the guitar, they can start playing, and they're playing music. It's a great entree into the world of music. The guitar, the saxophone,
Interesting. Now, just taking a little segue into the world of saxophone, there were these reports and verified that you actually did a fair amount of practicing with Sonny Rollins at one time and hung out with Sonny.
I wouldn't say I was practicing, but I was enamored of his being and his playing. And so we became friends, and one time we went off into the Alpine Vista off of
the Palisades Parkway.
Off the Palisades Parkway with our two tenors. I was so thrilled he would do this with me, which makes me want to do that with other kids too, because if somebody of Sonny's stature, would actually be friendly with me, what am I? I'm just a young kid playing the saxophone, not particularly great. Although I was pretty good, and in my inner head I thought I was better than him. But you didn't hear that. Underneath that, because when I first went to the Vanguard, I had a Sonny Rollins. I'd always get attracted to one track of a player. I didn't buy a lot of records at the time. I had one that Sonny was on, and it was like live at with Max Roach, and just playing Cherokee and all these tunes. And I don't think I ever owned. I hope Sonny's not listening. Maybe I owned the bridge. I bought the bridge. That was later. But I didn't, like with Buddy DeFranco, I had one record. See, this is focus. You don't need 1,000 records to get what a guy has. on one record, if he's really playing well, one track was enough to get me. And I thought, I listened to Buddy, or, at the time, and I listened to him play this tune. I thought, I want to do that. And I can. I thought, I can do that. And so with Sonny, there was an era of Sonny's playing that just killed me. It was ridiculous. It was amazing. And then a little bit later on, his playing changed, and I went down to the Vanguard to hear him with my horn. And I actually thought, I want to sit in, because I want Sonny to hear what I love so much about his playing that I didn't think he had anymore. We may cut all of this out because it could get me in trouble. I love Sonny Rollins. Well, but that was my reason.
But do you know there was a report in Downbeat at that time that in between sets, Sonny was backstage in the Vanguard in the kitchen area, and they heard two tenor players, and they said, "Who's that masked man playing?"
No. So it's not exactly what you're saying. I'll tell you what really happened. Okay. So when I came into the Vanguard, I had my horn. I wanted to sit in, and I said, "Is Sonny around?" I had enough chutzpah to just say, "Hi, I'm Eddie Daniels. Could I sit in with you?" And even worse, he wasn't around. He was in the back of the stage. There's a little room in the back of the band with a door, with enough room for 3 people to stand nose to nose in this room. So he was doing an interview for Downbeat. And I was allowed to go in there. I said, "Can I go in?" I'm going, and there's a candle, and Sonny, it's very mystical with a candle. It's so dark. There's no light in that room. And Sonny's doing an interview with a guy, Gordon, I think his name was. I forgot the name of the writer. And I stood there, and I just listened and said hi. I was stuck in this place, with Sonny. I don't know where I had the guts to actually do that. Because I thought I was better than I was. I was, young energy. Now I'd be scared to do that. But then I said, "Sonny, after the interview, could I sit in with you? Would that be okay?" He said, "Yeah." So I sat in, and I thought I was showing Sonny the Sonny that I loved about his playing, which was an adoration, but kind of saying, "Don't you remember when you had this thing, and now you're kind of there?" And so it was a kind of egotistical 20-year-old, 22-year-old going and saying that to Sonny. He let me sit in. And then in the interview, the interviewer then asked him afterwards, "What'd you think of that guy?" He said, "He sounded really good, And so nobody knew my name. So my ex-wife, my first wife, Benita, because she was there, she wrote a letter into Downbeat. This is secret stuff now. She wrote a letter into Downbeat and said, "Who was that masked saxophone player?" Right. So it was my wife at the time, saying, "Who was that guy that sat in with Sonny?" And she named herself, like Irving Karnofsky, she signed her name, something like that. So then the next month, the publishing of the next one, she writes a letter, "I was there that night," in another voice, another name, said, "I was there that night, and I heard that guy was Eddie Daniels." So then I got my name out. It was kind of a concocted thing, which I didn't ask for or want to do, but she wanted to do that. And then, and I became friends with Sonny as a result of all that. I never told him about it. I don't think he ever read the article or read the op-eds in Downbeat, and whoever did and cared, Yeah. And so that was kind of a funny thing, but the fact that I had the chutzpah to want to show Sonny.
Well, that leads to why you actually decided in the mid-'80s, with a very successful career in the studios and still playing jazz gigs on the side. I remember you had a regular, I think, Tuesday at Strikers, or
right?
Remember that?
With Dave Friedman.
Yeah. But what actually was the motivating force behind you deciding, well, I'm going to put down the flute and the saxophone and just focus on the clarinet? What was it that drove you to do that?
Well, I was teaching high school, like as a sub-teacher during the week while I had been playing.
Wait a minute, in the 80s? You were doing this?
Maybe a little earlier than that.
Wow.
I substitute taught at Westinghouse Vocational High School for a whole year because someone took a sabbatical. So I was teaching music. As a whole, in a whole year, I had the band at Westinghouse Vocational, which consisted of a tuba, an accordion, and a clarinet, playing the Coronation March for a whole year. Da, 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 da. Remember, it's a vocational high school. And, you know, there might have been one other instrument involved in that scene. So after a while, I just said, I can't do this. You know, I'm a musician. What am I doing here? And, you know, although I enjoyed it, there was a certain kind of joy of, number one, having a steady job and having punching a card every day in vocational high school. I had a job. And the kids were very tough. And I also had to teach health ed, which meant sex to these kids. Health ed means, hey, Mr. Daniels, tell us how to do it. You know? It was kind of like that back then. You know? And
thank God for the internet, right?
Yeah, right. Well, and it was tough. Some of those kids were very tough and very maligning, and, you know. So it was not easy working with them. But after that, after doing that and subbing in some other high schools, I realized I got to go back to Juilliard, get a degree. I had my bachelor's at that point. I was doing student teaching. But so I got to go back to school, and it's got to be more than, hey, Mr. Daniels. You know, it's got to be a little bit more than that. Yeah. So I went back to Juilliard as a grad student. And being in Juilliard, I never had a chance to play anything because I was a grad student. Frank Cohen comes in, and he gets all the first chair, everything, student orchestra. He gets a chance to play anything. Nobody ever asked me to play anything in Juilliard. And I had studied with Bernard. I got into Juilliard. My teacher, Joe Allard, was there. And I knew everybody, but I never got a chance to sit in an orchestra and do what I wanted to do. And because I was a grad student. And they would treat, you know, to go to Juilliard and enter as a grad student was much different than just coming in as a freshman. And Frank was an amazing player, and everybody went crazy over his playing, and he got to do everything. So here I am in this next situation where I'm getting a degree so I can do something else. And I didn't get a chance to play. So my thought was, all these guys are getting a chance to play in the orchestra. I said, F you, I'm going to play in front of the orchestra. So I decided I'm going to become the Galway of the clarinet. That's probably the tip of what that thought was.
So it was back that early at that time.
Well, I said, I don't want to have to deal with sitting on a first chair, or I would never play a second chair for more than a certain amount of time. It's fun to play second, but my inner energy was, I want to play all the solos. I want to get to do all the hard stuff, you know? So, all right, I can't do it in school. Screw it. I'm gonna just get good enough so that I can play classical stuff in front of the orchestra and do what I want. And then I realized not only do I want to do what I want, but I want to play jazz and classical in the same piece. I want to just mix it up. And because I then realized that when you stand in front of an orchestra and you have to make every single note perfectly beautiful, that there's a stress involved in that. And I just felt like I want to be the Eddie Daniels of the clarinet playing this stuff so that I could go out and then kind of play it my own way. And if I screw something up, then I have some jazz to relax me, and then I can come back and play the really hard stuff. Right. You know, so bringing jazz into that setting was a way of designing my life on stage with an orchestra to make me feel more relaxed, because when the jazz sections happen, I'm like, I'm home. Right. And I loved having the hard sections and the beautiful lyrical sections on the clarinet, but it gave me my own path in that music.
So even in all those years when you were doing the studio work and you were among the first call players in town, you still had that in your mind as something that was a desire to do down the line.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we never know, you know, you never know what you're going to do. I wasn't sure what it would be. You know, sitting in studios, running from gig to gig. It was a different period of time. The era before I was doing that, there were many more beautiful dates with string sections where Torrizito was writing stuff, and the great writers are writing all this stuff, and you go from session to session, and you're in heaven playing beautiful music. By the time I was there, it was like Jingles, you know, Burger King commercial with a string section, and you have 4 notes to play. And, you know, every once in a while there'd be a film date, and I'd get something to play on a film date, but I was this hungry guy. I wanted to play more. And so I had to figure out a way, how can I play more which you know, in the end, when I'm finally getting everything I want to play, watch out what you wish for, because now that I got everything I want to play and I have to play all these pieces and do all this, why did I do this? But I like it. It's fun. It's demanding. It makes me practice. But now I'm feeling like, well, it's enough.
Well, you've done it, and I hope you don't mind me saying this. You're in fantastic shape, not only physically, but I mean, as people will hear at the end of our video when you do some playing with Lee Musiker, your virtuosic ability on the instrument has not suffered one iota. It's really quite amazing. You're going to be 76 later this year. And your technical wizardry, I mean, it's really quite amazing. I mean, there are certain instruments that allow that to happen longer than others. But clarinet is one of the most demanding instruments physically as well as technically, and to still maintain that is really quite remarkable.
Well, I think it's more how you use the technical wizardry rather than, because there are a lot of really great technical players now in these years, young players, having heard me, having heard ridiculous players, even Ricardo will say that I kind of inspired him. And then, he can play anything at any time. And so can Corrado and some of the great players. And I can almost do anything at any time, but then I want to use that in a context of expression. So then the technique is something, I'd still practice it. I still pick it up and say, what's with that? Now focus on a few things and getting my fingers to feel feel like they're home on the instrument, that they belong there, that they're relaxed, that they just love being there. Because when I play fast...
Right, but also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the things I do remember in speaking with you and studying with you is that you didn't necessarily work on your technique by just putting, let's say, a Jean book or a Bamman book necessarily. I mean, you have done that, but you would do it literally creating little patterns and working them through the entire instrument, up and down.
I still do that.
And you told me one great exercise to play, I hope I remember this right, minor thirds and major sixths up and down every one of your instruments fluently, and that was one of the great pieces of advice I had for really gaining control technically over the instrument through the range. The minor third and the major sixth, the reverse, those are really difficult.
They are, and I was still, yesterday when I picked up the clarinet, I will do that. Right. It'll kind of come onto my fingers and say, okay, let's see if you can the clarinet's an instrument, not like the piano, Lee, which is so easy. I'm kidding. The only difference is you have to play 20 notes at a time. I only play one, so it's a little harder. But to be able, the clarinet, it's not a symmetrical instrument. You have these three registers, and you can play a low note and go straight up the scale by lifting fingers up, but then you go across a break, and then when you do chromatics, so it's kind of like. I wanted to be able to play anything on any note, at any interval on any note, any lick on any note. And I have to keep practicing that. It just have to do it. Because when I play with Lee Musiker, he's playing all this beautiful stuff at the piano he goes in and out, he moves the harmony in a different place. If you only know how to play a C chord, and somebody starts playing 1,000 other chords in between, C sharp, E flat, and minors, and augmenteds, and 11ths and sharp 9s, you have to know all those. You can't you can fake it. Stan Getz could fake it. He could play all that without even having to practice any of that. But I just like the idea that you become symmetrical from any angle of the instrument, and I still have a lot of work to do on that. And I enjoy practicing it.
When I was studying with you, the very first lesson I had with you, I still remember, and this is going back maybe 45 years, and I may have mentioned this to you, I came with the clarinet because I was totally knocked out hearing a jazz clarinet. I'd never heard a live performance of that, and I had heard you play with Thad Mel. And maybe at the Village Gate there was a session. Yeah. And I came and played There Will Never Be Another You. Now, I had very little knowledge of harmony, and I had very little piano skills. certainly. And you made me sit down at the piano after I played a chorus or two, and you were accompanying me, and you said, well, let me see, play the chords for me at the piano, because you knew that I was doing it by ear. I was sort of skirting the changes,
Yeah.
to put it
By
politely.
ear. By ear. You were in the neighborhood.
Yeah, right. I was knocking at the door. And you made me sit for that entire lesson. And I remember you also had this big white, it was like Dalmatian, I think.
Yeah.
Dog. He was, and I was scared. I remember I didn't dare
Really?
look because the dog was sitting right there.
No, it was a very soft dog. It was a very
but,
sweet dog.
But anyway, the point was that learning, you made me learn that tune at the piano, and that opened a lot of doors for me musically. And the piano is a major part of my practicing, especially learning a tune. And you had me learn the tune at the piano first. And you were a wonderful piano player, really, for, some doesn't have piano as your prime instrument.
Yeah.
I mean, you really can play. Can you talk to the necessity for musicians who especially want to improvise, the necessity about piano and how it helps you in your harmonic playing?
Well, first of all, most of us play melodies and we don't know what the bottom of the chord of those melodies are. So I was just thinking, there will never be another you. If I kind of moved over to the piano. So you have a melody. So you have this one chord. And then you go to the second chord. But if you're looking at that note, there's moving notes. So you know this note is there, and what would be underneath it? And so you get to know. You know, what would you? That's. So you're looking at where am I in the melody? What goes along with this melody? I'm wearing this shirt. What goes with it? A nice tie. So what goes with? So I just found something else, and I might play that in jazz instead of, or, I just can't. Whatever. So it just like opens up a whole other box of fun stuff to stare at and kind of see what goes with this melody. So there you have that line, right? So that. Yeah. So it just opens up possibilities. So when I'm playing, I kind of have the piano in me, a lot of it.
Do you actually sit at the piano and with the horn nearby
No, I just kind of work on a melody and just see where could I go with that.
Right, and then shed it on the instrument a little bit to see how it works.
I probably wouldn't shed it on the instrument.
Just get it in your ear.
Yeah, just kind of once I have a little bit of that, and it bleeds in some way. Instead of like a lot of us who are playing these single notes and we're up in this sphere and we kind of want to know the chords are, but we don't have that underneath and that little, I'm watching it kind of as a graph on the hard drive as it's going by. And now that I know that E flat to F, da, 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 that's nice. Even if the piano player plays the right chord, it doesn't matter. I could still play that on the sax or the clarinet because it has it's an entity of its own and it has a logic of its own. So it would even go against whatever you would play, Lee. It would be fine.
Right.
Or else I wouldn't get the gig. Then, anyway.
Right.
All right.
All right. And I also seem to remember you giving me a piece of advice years ago to learn your jazz on the saxophone and then transfer it to clarinet. You said it would be easier that way. Do you still feel that way? That's for a multiple woodwind player, that it might be more advantageous to really work on your jazz on the saxophone initially?
Well, mostly let's say, like I was a jazz saxophone player, so I had those kind of lines, and then you have to pick up this instrument, which the fingering makes you have arthritis, and suddenly your fingers don't want to go, and the saxophone has a logic. It's, octave key, say, play a note, press the octave key, you get the same note, an octave higher. On the clarinet, it's another register, it's another fingering. So when I heard Buddy play, and I heard those things, I said, I want to play those kind of licks on the clarinet. I could play them on the saxophone, they were more natural. So then I started to take a lick that I would like on the saxophone, and then just play it on a clarinet, and just see what it felt like, and get more comfortable. And I still do that on occasion, because it's not as logical an instrument linearly as the saxophone is.
Right. And you've referenced Buddy, of course, and we talked about Sonny Rollins. Who are some of the other players, not necessarily on even the instruments, but who are the musicians that really influenced you coming up? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
Stan Getz, love Stan, Miles Davis, Coltrane, big Coltrane. I even asked him to sit in one time, and I'm glad he didn't let me.
You were fearless, really.
I was fearless. I went down to the half note, and he's playing with his quartet. And I'm 22. I've got like cojones up the kazoo. Sounds like a nice name of a tune, cojones up the kazoo. and he was so sweet, and I just said, "Can I sit in with you?" And he said, "Oh no, I'm sorry, it's not going to work tonight." But we started talking about reeds, and he had this little sharpened reeds with a little hole in the block that had that stamp. And it was just like, it was my one. I'm glad he didn't ask me, because he was playing so great. I'm listening to how great he was playing, that I can't even. I wouldn't even sit in with him now, and I'm much better now than I was then. But my cojones are different,
Right. Well, when you're younger.
So Coltrane was like a huge influence. He changed the sound of the tenor, and Stan Getz, Bill Evans, the Cannonball.
Today, who are some of the players? Clarinet, saxophone. Who are the players that you most admire today playing, and who you find inspiring?
Well, I don't hear a lot of clarinet players, other than classical players who are inspirational, who can play anything. I don't hear a lot of jazz clarinet players who are inspiring, but there are good ones. There are a bunch of good ones. There's a lot of great young players now.
You're especially saxophone players.
Yeah, we went to Dizzy's the other night, and I heard a saxophone player that I never even heard of before. Bruce?
Bruce Williams?
Yeah. You know him?
Yeah, sure.
And I'd never heard of him.
Alto player.
Huh?
Beautiful alto player.
Yeah, terrific. Fantastic. And it was special. I enjoyed hearing him, the whole band, the trumpet player. Everybody was so good, and I didn't know, I would never sit in with them now. And but was sweet when I went over to Bruce and said how great I thought he sounded terrific. He said, "Oh, you've inspired me for so many years, So at least if I have my little place in the lineage of guys getting turned on and liking and taking it in their own direction, I think it makes me feel worthwhile in a sense,
Yeah. Let's go back to some of the teachers you alluded to earlier, and let's talk a little bit about each one. Jimmy Abato. In a few sentences, and we should. I also want to mention these names because people tend to forget these larger-than-life figures who at one time, as Phil Wood said, ruled the earth. They were the giants of the earth. Jimmy Abato was considered one of the greatest clarinet players and alto saxophone players, bass clarinet players, commercial musicians, classical players, and he even played lead with Glenn Miller's band, played the lead clarinet chair as a teenager.
Yeah, Al Galladoro was in that band too.
Yeah. These are incredible virtuosi, but you studied with Jimmy for a while.
Well, he gave me the prototype of the virtuoso that I wanted to be on a clarinet. His technique was so pristine. He could single tongue better than anybody that I've ever heard.
Amazing.
So in terms of him explaining me what to do, he didn't do that. He'd put his foot up on a stool and say, "Play for me, kid." And I was 12, and I was scared, and I'd cry a bunch of times. You know, he was not like a cajoling, warm mommy type. Like Joe Allard was more of a father figure. He'd put his arm around you. You had a relationship. Jimmy Abato was not quite that way, but what he could do on the clarinet was so inspirational. It didn't matter. He could play so beautiful. And when I heard how well his, you know, the sound, the technique, it was astounding, and it made me feel like I want to have that in my jazz, in my everything.
Sure.
Because Joe didn't have that. Joe was not a virtuosic clarinet player. Bernie Portnoy was a good clarinet player, but nothing of that kind of technique.
Right.
Although a fine player, you know. And
Well, Bonnard certainly was.
Bonnard had that.
That technique. Yeah.
Not quite like Jimmy Abato, though.
Right.
You know, not quite that. At least when I got Bonnard when I was 13, Bonnard was probably 75, my age. He was an old man, you know, by the time, you know.
Yeah, but you know, I had an experience with Jimmy toward the end of his career. He had left the Met Opera, and I was, for some reason, for a week I sat next to him playing alto sax. Boy, that was intimidating. But he was playing clarinet, and I never heard an articulated sound as resonant.
Yeah.
And he had to be 70 years old at that time. It really shook me because I just couldn't figure out how can you get so much resonance articulating a sound and sounding so beautiful at the same time. And you know, I would try to ask him a question. He said, "It's okay, kid." You know.
Yeah. Well, I think his physiognomy, the way his mouth was shaped, he had thin lips, and just natural. It's just like his sound was natural. He was not analytical. He never said, "Do this with your lips, with your tongue, keep your tongue high." Nothing of what Marcellus would say, or Joe Allard would say, or, you know, the shape of your mouth when you make a tone. Like you said, good kid.
Yeah. It was like
you
that.
know, and but inspiring to just have that in front of your face. Julie Baker was like that for me too. Right. Just not an analytical teacher of the flute, but so beautiful, even in a more, even taking what we said about Jimmy to the next extent, where Julie was such a beautiful soloist as a, you know, just not just a first flute player in an orchestra. You know, he was as beautiful a player as anybody ever was on the flute. Yeah. And to have that in front of you. And I'm pleased that I had a couple of dates where I actually played second flute to him on some jingles and some other things. And I had a beautiful flute, a Haynes flute that I got from Lawrence at the time. And I'm on a date with Julie, and I'm playing it, and he said, "Could I see that flute?"
Oh, look out.
Of course, when he hears somebody sound nice, "Can I see your flute?" And so he followed me home to my house. From the date, we walked all the way up from 48th Street to 89th Street to my apartment. And I was living alone at the time, and he sat on the radiator, which is like one of these external radiators, crossed his legs. From low E played Flight of the Bumblebee down to low B, like a cannon. You know, and of course I wouldn't let him have that flute. You know, he couldn't have that flute. But that was my way of getting even with him, because on my very first lesson with him, and I came with a Powell flute number 1960, which was a very early one that the old man Powell made. Right. And I was struggling with the headpiece, so I figured I'll go to Julie, he'll show me how to play. And he said, "Well, I got a bunch of head joints. Let's try these head joints." So he takes out a cigar box, and he's got about 6 or 7 head joints. Some of them were gold, some of them were just silver. They weren't all Powell head joints. They were different makers. And he put one in, I play it, and suddenly I sounded like a cannon, like he sounded in my room and on the low E, without being Julie Baker that great. But I said, "Oh, I love that." And he said, "Okay, try this one." I figured, I'm going to come out of here with something that will make me feel so good. And so I tried each one, and he's closed by, "Sorry, I can't sell any of these." And that was my last lesson. I didn't take another lesson after that. I was kind of a little upset, but we became very good friends. And as I say, I ended up playing on dates with him. And at one point, he hired me to play the Calandrelli Concerto in Connecticut with an orchestra that he was being the contractor of this festival somewhere in Connecticut.
Up in Danbury, I think.
Yes, that's right. And there was a pond out in front. This is funny. So I have this cadenza where I'm playing all these notes, and suddenly I'm hearing frogs going, "Rabbit, ribbit in the middle of my cadenza. So I started playing a duet with the frogs. They're going ribbit, and I went, "Nana, nana." It was fun. So, we each have these relationships with people in the business, and he was still a great, great influence, and all he had to do was play. He didn't have to analyze anything, because the gift was just hearing that sound in your face. Now, Tom Nyfinger was another one of my great teachers, my favorite of all the flute teachers that I had, who could have that sound and also pick up the flute and said, "I'm now going to play for you the Mozart Clarinet Concerto on the flute." And he starts it, and it sounds like a clarinet. He knew how to make the sound of a clarinet on the flute. So true. And so Tom became one of my huge influences because he had such a sense of sound, that it wasn't just one beautiful sound. He could imitate Julie, he could do an imitation of Harold Bennett, he could do Galway, and then he could do the most beautiful French sound on the flute. And I just loved, and he was analytical. Very much. Very analytical with the beauty of the sound and everything. And he was a Meshuggah. You have to be a little crazy to be that good. You just have to.
Yeah, because he was also a wonderful pianist.
That's right. Well, at one point I got the gig to play the Mozart Clarinet Concerto with the London Symphony. And Ronnie saying, "Oh, you should go to Bob, go to Bob Marsalis and play the Mozart for him." And I just thought, I got to play with someone who's a little looser than Bob, although Bob was fanatic. I didn't know Bob. So I went to Tom, and Tom played the piano part of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto for me in my room and gave me ideas about what to do from the piano. So, that's kind of the kind of brilliance that, and Marsalis was brilliant in his own way, but Tom had this palette of stuff.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And I actually studied with him thanks to you.
Yeah.
Because when I was studying flute with you, you kept saying, "Well, Tom does this and that." And I thought, I got to study with this guy Tom too. And it changed my life as it did yours. So teachers can be so important. And I think one of the things I've tried to get across in these interviews with various artists over the last several years is that the studying doesn't stop once you get out of school, once you get a degree. There's so much to learn, and there's so many people who have so much knowledge to gain from and to inspire you and you study with so many people over the years, and you're still studying, in your own way.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of music, and I think of any discipline that you go into, but especially playing so many instruments and so many different styles of music, that it enhances you as a human being and as certainly a musician to continue to study.
Well, I think you could substitute the word focus for study. It's still, how do you study something? How do I become great at this? How do I understand this? How do I do this better? So it's really learning how to focus and not get distracted with other things while you're trying to be focused with one thing. I'm a one thing practicer. The sound of the clarinet, I would play in one register and one sound and try to just get into that one thing. Huh. And that's kind of how I am with meditation too. I'm reading a lot of Tibetan stuff now, and they talk about, they all have 25 practices or more, hundreds of practices that take you to the goal, which is the ultimate learning how to focus, and I'm realizing I'm a one guy practicer. I want the one thing to practice. Don't give me 100 things, please. I want the one thing that I could dig my teeth into and really get.
Right.
And
maybe that's what Jerry Dodgen alluded to earlier about how to practice, is that, sometimes we have so many things in front of us that we might have to perform, we might be responsible for. I'm on clarinet, but I got to get to flute today and all that, and it's very easy to get distracted and to be overwhelmed by the amount of things that we are, might have in front of us. But to be able to isolate that, as you say, that one thing, that takes a great deal of inner strength and discipline to be able to put those other things aside and do that.
And to also, the important thing is to know when you're distracted. A lot of us don't know that. We're playing something and then we jump to another thing and you have a thought while you're playing and then your thought goes in one direction and you're trying to practice something else and you're not aware that you started thinking about, what am I having for lunch? You're playing and it's like 11:35 and I'm getting hungry, and you stop thinking about what you're doing, and you start thinking, well, I think I'll have this. Which restaurant should I go to? Right. So you don't notice that while you're practicing, what's your mind doing? What am I thinking of now? Am I really still staying with this, or is distraction happening? And so just knowing that you were distracted is enough to just, okay, let's go back. I'll have lunch later. It'll be terrific. I will have lunch, but maybe at a delicatessen. You never know.
In Riverdale?
All right. But how to stay focused. It's the key to life. You know, you could learn everything you need to know about life by focusing so deeply on any one thing that the whole life, the whole box will open up and give you everything.
Okay.
You know?
All right. And one final question before I want you and Lee to have some time to play for us. When you're learning a tune, what is your approach to learning a tune? I've sort of intimated, I know piano is such a vital part,
yeah.
But do you go through phrases, take phrases apart and play in short phrases? Do you deal with it playing, some people play the tune in every key. I know Phil Wood used to make sure his students would play the melody in every key before they even started to improvise sometimes. Do you have a real process for learning a tune?
Well, I try to figure out what I don't know about the tune and what am I struggling with. And I struggle more with my own tunes than I do with standard tunes, because I sit at the piano and I write this stuff and then I say, oh God, now I have to play on this. And you know, for someone like Lee, and I play with a lot of very fine pianists, who then I give them my tunes and they're just playing the heck out of it. They play it like it's nothing. And I'm still struggling, like, because I wrote it in a certain key and now I'm transposing slash chords. I have to remember, write out the tune in your own key so you can figure out what you're doing, you know, and then figuring out, why am I not finding the scale that goes with this chord that I wrote, which is not so out of the ordinary. So I'll sit there and I'll play the piano and try to find, what can I do on this? Why am I not finding what to play on my own tune? You know?
So you literally take it as a very slow process, measure by measure or phrase by phrase, depending on...
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there are some tunes that sometimes I don't do anything, and somebody will put a sheet in front of me and I'm transposing it, and I can, because I'm not caring that much or I'm not nervous about it, I can just go through it and suddenly I'm okay. And then suddenly I start studying it and I realize how little I know about what I just played, you know. But sometimes just, you know, there's many approaches, but one is to not care and just go. Like you did, and you came and played,
Right.
There'll never be another
Right.
you. And sometimes you can really find good stuff when you're not judging yourself. And then you start sitting down and you realize, hey, I don't really know this. How do I, you know,
Right.
How come Lee can play it? Alan Posquith sits down and he can play the hell out of my own tune, and I'm struggling with my own tune. And so there's struggling, and then there's letting go of struggling, and then seeing if you could just do it without not thinking too much about it. You know, how much do I have to know about this? Sometimes when I play with Lee and I don't know all the things that are going by when he's playing, I just say, forget it, just play. You know, and I'll just find things and I'll let my intuition find things. But then I'll sit at the piano and say, why can't I find this chord? How come I'm struggling with this one thing? So, you know, you have to pick and design what you practice and what you need. And a lot of guys don't pick the things, they practice what they already know. They practice stuff that's easy instead of practicing the stuff that you're struggling with and that you don't know.
Right.
So the good part is, if you know what you don't know, then you're really in good shape. If you know what you don't know. If you don't know what you don't know, you're in trouble. You know?
And then you can run for political office.
That's right. Perfect. Right. Melancholia. Anyway, this is Lee Musiker at the piano. And I studied with his dad, Ray, when I was about 11 or 12. And Lee was not even a thought in your father's mind at that time.
He was focused.
He was focused. Very good.
This is
Melancholia.
this is a Duke Ellington tune, a
Yeah.
lesser known Duke tune, but a beautiful one. Beautiful.
Great song, huh?
Yeah.
Nice tune, right?
Yeah. I played one wrong note in the melody. I did, because I didn't transpose it right. But that's okay.
Another good tune, right?
Yeah, something fast, something like this, just to... What are you doing?
I'm thinking about corned beef and pastrami, but I have to laser focus. I need a sandwich.
I need a sandwich. I'll take a tuna on rye.
But not yet. So this, you rolling or no?
Yeah, we're rolling.
Woodwind.